Welcome to the Meez podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Today is the last official guest interview of season 1 of the Meez podcast. We'll be doing some recaps and other fun content in between seasons, and we'll kick off season 2 just after the new year in 2024. So my guest for today's show is an old friend and a super talented chef named Dave Santos. We met over 2 decades ago, almost 2 decades ago, cooking at Bouley's restaurant and became fast friends. Dave is of Portuguese descent. He was American born, but his family is all from Portugal. And actually, the first time I ever had Dave's food was actually this seafood soup that he made for staff meal that we still talk about to this day because it was just friggin' delicious. And I never had anything like it. And I couldn't stop asking questions about Portugal and Portuguese food. We talk a lot about that today, so we'll dig into that. Dave and his team were just awarded 3 stars from the New York Times for Foxface, a restaurant born out of a former sandwich shop that is crushing it in New York City with this sort of contrarian approach to proteins that you might expect, serving things like kangaroo and camel, to name a few. Dave also had one of the most successful underground supper clubs called Segredo that he ran out of his old apartment in Roosevelt Island, and guests would take like the tram or ferry over to dine with him. So we talk a little bit about what it is like to run a supper club and why most folks shouldn't. And we definitely talk about Foxface, but we spent a lot of time talking about Portugal, the history of the country, and the impact that it had on the culinary world in so many ways. I learned a ton. We talk about food critics and the value that they bring, and sometimes the things that make it difficult to run a restaurant because of them, and maybe the responsibility that we think they could and should have in journalism. Anyways, I had an awesome time. It was longer than we had expected it to be because we just couldn't stop talking, and I learned a lot. And as always, I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Hi, how you doing?
Mr. Dave Santos.
What's going on?
So nice to see you.
You as well. It's been too long.
It has. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I am just delighted to have you here. I was thinking about this today on the ride over here, that we worked together 19 years ago.
God, has it been 19 years, really?
19 years ago.
I just said 15.
At Bouley. And that's dating ourselves because, I was in my 20s. I think you were in your 20s. Actually, we graduated from Johnson & Wales.
Johnson & Wales. So we actually have a prehistory.
That's right.
That.
Although I don't remember if we knew each other or talked.
I used to see you at the gym because you were on the wrestling team.
Yes.
And I was on the baseball team.
That's right.
So we used to see, we used to cross paths.
That's right. And then I separated my shoulder at a tournament, I think at Cornell or something. And that was the end of wrestling for me. Anyways, glad to have you here, man. I would love it if you could kind of widen us up a little bit with how you got here and your background. But I wanted to sort of preface it by today, I wanted to talk about Portuguese food a little bit with you, as well as, of course, your uber successful new restaurant, Foxface, and Segredo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get some learnings from that. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about your thoughts on food critics and
plenty of those thoughts.
So anyways, to wind everybody up, Chef Dave Santos, a little bit of your background.
I'm a first generation Portuguese American. Both my parents immigrated here. My dad in 75, I think it was. And my mom in 76 or 74 and 75, one of those. And I grew up in Jersey.
So English is their second language?
English is it's my second language. Technically. The first language I learned growing up was Portuguese. And then I learned English. I actually almost got held back in school because I couldn't grasp English.
Tough language.
So I grew up in Jersey, Portuguese community in Per Se and Bouley, small couple dots around the world of Portuguese communities. San Diego, Toronto, Newark, New Jersey, all have small Portuguese communities that most people went to when they came over.
So just a quick question, do Portuguese communities sort of gravitate to the Brazilian communities too? My sister lives in Framingham, where there's just tons of Brazilian folks.
So the Portuguese immigration kind of predates the Brazilian coming over. And it also, like, the Azorians all kind of came for whatever reason to, like, the Cape, to, Boston, that area. Mainland Portuguese people, well, one of the first largest immigrations from Portugal was actually to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Because they were giving basically free citizenships for the Portuguese to work, or for anybody, but the Portuguese took advantage of it to work in the cane fields.
Gotcha.
And so that was the first big migration, basically, of Portuguese to America. They went there in San Diego for the fishing industry. And after that, there was actually a pretty decent sized migration of Portuguese to New York, kind of the West Village area. Even today, there's still some dots of things, some Portuguese stores and things that still kind of exist, but it's almost all gone now. But that kind of happened after Salazar came out of power. That really when the first, after him was New York, and then Newark was a huge one, obviously, in Toronto as well.
Yeah.
But most of those people are all from the mainland, the Azorians. For whatever reason, the Azorians mostly went into New England.
Yeah.
Essentially.
A lot more seafood fishing there.
Yeah. I mean, they're seafaring people. Yeah. So, anything with the ocean, like, that's why Toronto is very interesting to me, because it's like landlocked.
Yeah, there's no lake.
It's not a lake, but
yeah. So Portuguese background, which we're going to dig into a bunch. And then I don't remember, you went to culinary school, Johnson, Wales.
Yeah.
And I think you maybe were cooking before that, but like, how did you sort of come up in the food world?
So, I mean, being Portuguese, like, my parents, they were kind of both poor farmers, in Portugal. And so when they came over, they brought that with them. So our lives were very much around, like, gardening, raising rabbits, pigeons for food. And so, like, I used to joke, like, I grew up having learned how to, kill a rabbit, a pig, a chicken by a very young age. So, like, my childhood was very immersed in food, as I think most first generation, kids are, because they can't, usually people come over and they do what they know, right? And for my parents, it was gardening, farming, working hard, And so I grew up in food, essentially. And as I got older, I was only really good at two things: baseball and cooking. Like, I was a terrible student. I'm dyslexic, so that messed up my, education a little bit, because I never said anything. I found out later in life that's why I couldn't read very well.
What'd your parents do, by the way?
So my dad, to this day, guy's an animal. He unloads trucks at Food Town, which is a grocery store.
Yeah.
He started working there when he first came over, pushing carts. Back in the day, when they had, like, people pushing carts.
Yep.
So that's where he started. He's been there ever since. So
that's awesome.
Literally almost 50 years in the same profession. He's not retired yet. He's 74 years old, and he's still unloading trucks at 74 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. And my mother, she did a couple different things when she first came over. But through most of my life, her primary work was, like, cleaning houses and stuff. That was what she did for, her end of the work between the two.
Yeah. So you being a chef is definitely divergent from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, they wanted a better life for all their children, as I think every parent does for their child. Not that they're disappointed in the work that I do, but it's, the life is a grind, as you well know, and they didn't necessarily want that life, they came from a grinding life, they're very proud of it, but food is just what I did, and so it was kind of a natural thing. That's why I went to Johnson Wales, because culinary, and they had a Division III baseball team. So that's why it's literally why I chose that college to go to.
It's so funny. That's the same reason I went there, is because I was supposed to go to college for wrestling. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to cook in the country.
It's wild. Yeah, I know.
But they were, coming up into that when I came there, but I wouldn't have gone there otherwise.
Well,
I'd never heard of them.
Yeah, well, this is not too far before us. Like, even the baseball team, I think 4 to 6 years before I started going there, they were basically a club team. It wasn't that, they haven't been a Division, 3 team for all that long. as colleges go. So that was one of the most attractive things to me, was like, hey, I can go there and play baseball. Dude, I'm 5'4", right? I've never had any delusions of playing for, professional baseball, but I was really good. I was a really good ball player, and I did love playing. So I wanted to elongate that love as long as I could, within reason, right? Like, again, I never thought I'd go pro or anything.
Yeah.
But.
So what'd you do after culinary school? Where'd you go work?
So I went back to Jersey to start. I worked at a place. It's still there. It's changed hands quite a bit now. It's called the Ryland Inn.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
At the time, I was under a chef named Craig Shelton.
That's right.
Super genius kind of guy, and super intense environment. Like, one old French style of work. One crew, lunch and dinner, So you worked 89, 90 hours a week, the whole thing. I was only there for about 6 months or so, something like that. Then I got into a fight. So we won't get too deep into that. But and then went to a place called Restaurant Nicholas, which was basically the number one restaurant in Jersey for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And then I came to New York, where I went to Bouley, met you, went to Per Se, moved to Chicago for a little bit, just for like a year. Enjoyed it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, enjoyed it, but didn't love it. And I got a job offer from Nicholas Harari, the owner of Restaurant Nicholas, to come back to be the CDC of Restaurant Nicholas, which then I was there for 3 years as the CDC.
Cool. Well, and there's a lot more after that, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But before we dig into Foxface and Um Segredo, I just wanted to, for a minute, jam out on Portuguese food, because I think I loved working with you, but I think the thing I always remember most is this seafood soup that you made for a staff meal, which, by the way, staff meal at most restaurants can be pretty incredible. At Bouley, great restaurant, terrible staff meal.
Nobody was there to work.
But you made this seafood soup that I would always ask you to make. Yeah. We would make it like once every, I think you made it once. I was like, what is this? And you're like, oh, this is just the typical, Portuguese stew. So, like, what should people know about Portuguese cuisine, and like how has it impacted how you cook today?
For me, the thing I think I would love people to know more about Portuguese cuisine is the actual impact Portugal has had on cuisine in the world. Okay, because Portugal was such a vast, colonizing kind of country. And not even obviously colonizing, but also just with trade agreements, because they were so seafaring. Like Japan is a perfect example. The Portuguese were the only country to be allowed to trade with Japan for 100 years, 98 years it was. And there's an entire cuisine in Japan called barbarian cuisine that's based around Portuguese influences on Japan. So things that people know today, like tempura, it's actually Portuguese. It comes from temperare, and it comes from this bean that there's a dish called peixinhos de horta, which means fish of the garden. And what they were green beans that are battered, tempura fried, and then they're actually stored on ships. Because they're fried, they can last a really long time. And so the ship-faring people that would go to Japan had these on them, and so they taught them how to make them. And that developed into tempura.
I mean, it is insane if you think about it, how much of an impact this tiny little country had in the world.
I'm telling you, the vindaloo, everybody knows vindaloo, right? That's actually Portuguese, or inspired by a Portuguese dish. Same idea. Vindaloo comes from pork that would be stored in barrels with garlic and wine, and it would vinegar out. So it would almost turn into like a pickled pork over the sea trips. Oh. So vinho de alho, wine and garlic. Vinho de alho, vindaloo. That's what it comes from.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So they took...
Do they still make that today?
Yeah, that's still, kind of, I don't wouldn't say it's as common,
Yeah.
As it once was.
It's interesting. It seems like a lot of these foods were created out of necessity.
Oh, I mean, 100%. It's, as rich of a country as it was at that time, there's obviously still lots of class, bananas were, I remember my mother talking about bananas and being like, that was like a gift. Like you gave a gift of a banana, because not everybody can afford it, but a lot of foods come from necessity. But for me, like I said, I think, the impact that Portugal has had on food across the world, I think is super important to me. There's so many very famous dishes that didn't exist before the Portuguese kind of got involved. And a lot of these dishes come from like, vindaloo obviously isn't made like that in Portugal. It's a result of, hey, I have this product and then I'm here in Goa or where, Goa in particular. And let's use the ingredients of the land, And
I have like a million questions now about this. So, I mean, you choose, because I want to learn a little bit more about tinned fish, because I know that's pretty big in Portugal. And then generally speaking, like, how diverse is the cuisine and the culture throughout this tiny country of Portugal?
It's interesting. We all know, well, most people in food know about like the relationship between cod, right, and Portugal. There is not a cod anywhere near Portugal, right? So this is a national dish, right? So Portuguese settlers came to Nova Scotia. They would go on these crazy trips, settlements, salt cod, bring it back. Portugal's one of the only countries that I know of that went and got a national dish, right?
Crazy.
Right? Like, think about that. That's wild, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is not something that's eaten normally, or wasn't until they developed a trade around it, So from like an ingredient standpoint, it's diverse, but it's all is still very localized. So it's a combination of things. Like you don't see like relating to tins, but one of the more famous tins in Portugal is actually like mackerel and curry oil. Like that tin has been around for hundreds of years because of the relationship in Goa.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to that, there are a lot of cultural diversity as far as food is concerned. But on the everyday basis, it's simple. Like a lot of it is very simple. It's local. It's
what I meant is, for example, in Mexico or in India or really in America, like you can't, or China, like there isn't Mexican food. There's food from Oaxaca or from Puebla or from Yucatan, and in India, you have Goa is very different from Kashmiri. Or in Portugal, are there different sort of segmentations of?
There's, again, I think to that, I don't know if it's that diverse because it is such a small country. There's definitely areas are way more known for. When you go to the South, it's almonds and figs and, because the climate is warmer and it's seafair, all the oceans there. So you see tons of olives and stuff.
What's the size relative to like a state?
Connecticut, I think it is something like that. It's I can't remember off the top of my head. I might have to Google that, but I think it's like Connecticut.
Yeah. So
you can drive across it in an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Wow.
From top to bottom, it's about 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours drive.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
so that's, it's not the Pennsylvania, probably. I don't know, something.
So what is like what is the culture of tin fish in Portugal? Because the way that you're talking about it sounds like people have their go-to tins, and there's, I don't know if there's different, if someone owns the market of manufacturing them, or if there's artists, tin makers.
It's a little bit of everything. I mean, obviously you're seeing a big resurgence of it now. Like Jose Gourmet is probably one of the newer tins, and just getting involved in, all the other, if you look at like Minerva, like those companies, literally over 100 years old.
Yeah.
All of them.
Has the process changed for them?
Not a whole lot. Tinning is tinning. From a production standpoint, it probably has changed, but everything is still hand packed, hand sorted, cooked, steam jacketed, cooked, and then usually hand labeled, most of them. It's just always been part of culture.
Do you use them in your cooking still today?
Not in the restaurant. Sometimes we do things in the restaurant. I've done like tin fish dinners and stuff like that with my pop-up, which is awesome. But, you can do lots of different dishes with them, but truly most of the time they're literally eaten out of tin.
I find like I'll just, at night, some matzah and butter, some tin fish.
Yeah, fantastic.
Like
you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Like you can't go wrong. It's just the quality. The problem in America is that, those tins, sardines, whatever it is, they're made like shit. They're used, shitty product, and you end up with shit. Use shit, get shit, right? That's what I always say. And so it's gotten such a bad name here in America for so long. Like if you ate tins, sardines, or whatever, like you were poor, like you were nothing. In Portugal is part of life.
Yeah.
Same in obviously Spain and France and all these tin cultures, it's just looked at differently.
Yeah.
And it's not expensive.
Is there an iteration of like the Ventresco tuna belly that gets, cured in Spain, in Portugal?
I've seen it more over recent years, but I guess I've been looking at, a little bit more as well, where there are different separations of belly and stuff like that, especially some of the stuff coming out of the Azores.
Yeah.
I think has separation. I don't think that used to be the case before. Before it was tuna.
What about Pastéis de Nata? Like, what's the origin of that?
Best.
Where do I get it in New York? And second, what's the origin? Because it seems obviously like it feels like there's some sort of French influence there. But
been making Pastéis de Bouley or Pastéis de Nata at the Belay, like nunnery or whatever it is that started them for, I don't know, 300 years, 400 years, something like that. Well, maybe even longer. So it does not have like the French influence that, it's a laminate dough, but it's not like a croissant. It's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
You make a laminate dough and then you pinwheel it like a cinnamon roll.
Mm-hmm.
Then you cut it like a cinnamon roll.
Yep.
And you take that and you put it face upward. Then with your thumb, you fill the mold. And so when it bakes layered and flaky, but not like elevated, it doesn't puff,
And is it just a standard custard?
Yeah. It's just standard custard. What makes them the most famous, I think, is the way they're cooked. They're cooked at pretty high temperature so that the outside gets crisp and the top gets caramelized.
So like fast and hot.
There's no like water bath or anything like that. They're literally like, if you go to Pastéis de Bouley in Lisbon, which everyone should go to if they're in Lisbon, they now have glass windows into their operation, so you can kind of watch them making it. It's pretty wild, and they just jam. I think I asked one of the servers there once. I think they make 20,000 a day or something like that. Like it's something wild.
Yeah, the original cronut.
Yeah, like literally, the people are lined up to get, and they're totally worth it. Totally worth it. They're so different there than they are here. There's
why
the baking, the way they bake it.
But why can't someone recreate that here?
Because they should be baked and served.
Oh, gotcha. But again, I mean,
can you do it here? Sure, of course.
Is there anybody that's doing that?
I guess Joey Batts. I think he has a spot on the Lower East Side. He might have 2 spots actually now. He's doing a good job. I think he's doing the best one. I think it's called Joey Batts Cafe. I mean, he has a passion for Pastéis de Nata, and so he is trying to do them very well here. And I think he does a really good job. Stuff in Newark you can get like same day, kind of thing, are very good. I have not seen any that reach the pinnacle of what you get in Portugal, though, sadly. Yeah. And I remember one of the first, I grew up having them, right? And they were like whatever to me. Then I would go to Portugal, and a friend of our family had a bakery, and he made the town's bread and all those things. And again, I love cooking, so I did a couple shifts at the bakery as a kid, and I remember helping taking out the Pastéis de Nata and then letting them cool a little bit and like eating one like warm. Like a fucking epiphany, man. Like it was crazy. It was so crispy, so creamy, and caramelized sugar, and it's like you get that brulee top, like the creme brulee, but it's like super warm and it's wild. It's so good. It's so good. And
I was talking about this with, who was this? With Nilu, Ultimate. We were talking about pho. And why are there these things that we just can't recreate in the States? You have to reverse engineer some of these things and just make them.
It's not about reverse engineering. It's about production, I think. And here in the States, especially with something like that, I think we produce for days, right? We're looking to make this product, as much of it as possible, to sell as much as possible. And then inevitably people cut corners. And, so if you just followed the recipe that the nuns were making 500 years ago, like, you would have that product.
There are certainly enough restaurants that have a high enough check average that could probably do it. And maybe just because it's so simple, they would have to sort of elevate it somehow. So it doesn't become, it's a conundrum. It's like this, it's like this innovator's dilemma of anybody that could afford to make this simple dish, which is crazy, by the way.
Right.
Can't, but if you could afford to, then you don't.
Yeah. It's really weird. It's weird that way. It's, because I don't know, like, costs of things are different. I mean, I don't know.
Dominique Ansel, I'm sure, could figure out how to make it delicious.
Of course, I'm sure. I mean, 100%. He could. I mean,
Dominique, if you're listening,
yeah, exactly.
Just, can you please make us Pastéis de Nata?
Well, you will get people lining up. I mean, the thing. It's funny. I understand what you're saying. Can you charge enough for it in America? Right. You have to remember, like, these things. Like, when you go to Portugal, like, you buy them by the fucking sleeve.
Yeah.
And there's like,
but they're not expensive though.
No, that's what I'm saying. You have this thing that is handmade, hand created by, you literally watch the bakers sitting there with their thumbs filling 20,000 molds a day. Mm-hmm. You buy them by the sleeve and they're like less than $1
It's so
a piece.
Interesting. There's something there about I think in America, we have an inclination to optimize. So we have something that's working and there are people doing it.
Yeah.
How do we
make it faster?
How do we do this at scale? How do we make it faster? How do we create more efficiencies from it?
Yeah.
And
which doesn't always make it better.
Doesn't always make it better. But you think about, if there's a person hand making this thing and you're charging 30 cents for it.
Yeah.
That's a tough model unless you're crushing it. But
and
people do it.
It's butter. It's not like it's not like bullshit shortening. It's literally this thing that you have to make with butter, hand stuff, wash when in the oven. Like, there's so much touch to it, person touch to it, that it would automatically be more expensive here in the States, right? Because, our labor costs are totally different here. But I just also don't think people want to do that work.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the loss of the artisan a little bit, So I think that's part of it as well. But imagine you'd have to pay 6 people to hand stuff.
Well, and you'd also be probably paying, folks that wouldn't be nearly as fast
I mean, these people, I'm telling you, got to watch. I think I'll probably have a video of it on my phone. These people are literal machines doing this work.
We'll definitely need to share that video.
Yeah.
But, it's funny. There's so many things in not just Portugal, but everywhere, like where the world takes it, not just America, and turns it into something else.
Yeah.
I love port and Madeira. Like, I love it. I can't drink it now, unfortunately, because of some allergies, but there are obviously incredible ports and Madeiras. I mostly sort of correlate them with things like preserving black truffles.
Right.
And, making a sauce with red wine and port. Of course, having a port, after dinner with a chocolate cake.
Always delicious,
like that. But what's your take on port these days? And has it changed in Portugal?
The one thing that the Portuguese aren't great at is change. They're a stubborn country. They're stubborn people, myself included. And so when you look at industries that have been around for hundreds of years, you don't often see change. Just doesn't happen. And so most of those industries like port and stuff, they're literally the same. I mean, they've grown and obviously, that sort of thing, but the method of making them, the method of doing them doesn't change. Like, they just don't change, and they don't want to change, which is fine. If you're doing something well, then keep doing it.
Yeah.
The only time you see change is like what I was saying earlier, when you have an upstart come in, like Jose Gourmet or something like that. Mm-hmm. then you'll start to see a little bit of change. But when you're talking about port, again, I haven't done any sort of research or anything, but I can't think of a port company that's probably less than 50, 60 years old. I think, you have the Taylors, the Croft, all those like been around forever. You know? So
it is happening with things like Madeira, but it's a different
it's a
thing.
little bit different.
Was it the Rare? I think it's called Rare Company, right? Is that what it's called?
But possibly,
All right. Anyways, we talked about Portugal enough. That was my selfish. I just wanted to dig into that.
No.
So let's talk about something that isn't Portuguese, which is your new restaurant, Foxface.
Yeah.
By the way, congrats, 3 stars, New York Times.
Thank you.
Is, for those of you that don't know, that is really fucking hard to do. There are not many of them, and it just even today, it's still incredibly difficult to get 3 stars, and you did it.
We did. I didn't. We did.
You and your team did it. So what is Foxface? Tell us a little about the concept. And then I have, some other questions.
Yeah. So Foxface is funny. Foxface is the company, if you will, or the brand was started by 2 people, Savan and Ori. 2 people I've known for literally 20 years. I actually met them at Bouley. They're super food people. And I first came across them on one of the food boards like eGullet or something that I was active on for a while. I believe Ori's offices at the time were down by Bouley. So he and Savan would come in for lunch all the time. And we just became very good friends. And over the last 20 years, we've just been good friends. They're so passionate. I mean, they're extremely successful people. They're amazing at their personal work, and what they do. But they've always loved restaurants and food and super passionate about that. And so they moved to Japan a little bit after the tsunami happened. They opened a branch of their business in Japan, in Tokyo. And they took the opportunity while being there because, Japan being so food driven, to do like little pop-up stuff and, do some creating and everything. And so when they came back, finally, they wanted to open just a small like sandwich shop. And that was called Foxface. All right. And so I helped them develop some of the stuff for there, just getting purveyors, nothing crazy. They really were the creatives behind like the sandwiches and stuff. And they grew Foxface. It was tiny little thing, but they grew it and it was very successful. They even got a Times review for a sandwich shop, which is kind of weird.
Like a FlowFab review or
no? Pete Wells.
Wow, really?
1-star, like great 1-star review, like for a sandwich shop, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. Yeah. But they were doing good things. I mean, they got attention because they were doing things very differently. They were using things like camel and kangaroo, and like they are very interested in the different things, and so during the pandemic, they were looking to expand on sandwich shop. Basically, Will Horowitz from Harry Unitas was looking to, didn't want to do Harry Unitas, I think, anymore. And they knew each other. I think they both live in the same neighborhood down in the Lower East Side. Harry Unitas has a huge smoker in the back, and they had a lot of like smoked meats on their sandwiches and stuff. And they were looking to expand. And so they're like, all right, this could be a good opportunity to turn this space into sort of like a commissary for thing. Then maybe do like some fun pop-ups and stuff in the front, And so they started to turn that space over. And then they needed a chef, and they asked me, and I sent them some people, and just things never really kind of worked out. And in truth, I wasn't really that excited about getting back into the restaurant industry, from doing what I was doing. And finally I gave in. I was just like, all right, dude, let's just do this. You're saying all the right things to me right now. So I've known you for this long. Let's get together. Let's try to do something. And so Foxface is really founded on the idea of like, not being a regular restaurant, like not being the normal restaurant. Like we're not using chicken or doing normal pastas and everything. We just want to be different and great, and source amazing. I mean, the stuff we use is out of this world, but it's just not whatever. Like we didn't want to be a restaurant that you can go and get like the same things everywhere.
When you say it's sort of different, it's supposed to be a contrarian restaurant. I get the food part, right? So we won't use chicken, but we'll use camel and we'll use kangaroo and things like that. Are there other aspects of service or have the interaction with the team or something that is also you look to be different?
Yeah, I think we're we're one of the first restaurants that I've been in that, actually pays people.
Money?
Yeah, actual money. It's
Wow.
very interesting.
Consistently?
Very consistently.
Wow. On time?
Usually. We had all this talk during I say that because we had all this talk during the pandemic about, we need fucking change and this has got this and that. And then I won't mention the restaurant, but the restaurant helped revamp their menu. It was like being in the exact same place. And I don't think that many restaurants changed thanks to the pandemic. Everyone's still trying to not pay people, and
and just so we're clear, when you're saying not pay people, just not pay people enough.
Correct. Yeah, not paying living salaries, living wages.
So can you talk maybe just a little bit about the menu? It sounds like you're using some, non-traditional type of, proteins.
Yeah.
Anything else about the menu that is like, non-traditional?
I mean, it's kind of like the place is designed in a way that like we want you to take your time eating. Like we don't try to push people out, right? We basically only do 2 turns and we're only 30 seats, right? The menu is designed with interesting things that we want you to kind of enjoy and take your time eating, if that's what, it takes. But also just like, I don't know, what's the best way to put it? Like using different things, but like we're also not like, I don't know, like just crushing you on the bill, I think is a big thing. Like we're serving a 2-pound piece of fluke that's, $70.
Fluke, that's kind of normal.
Yeah, exactly. What's not normal is that they're 20 pounds.
That's not.
And they're black.
Oh, so you do like a whole fluke?
We do.
Was it like in a cage?
Not in a cage. We have a wood oven and we roast them in the wood oven.
Yeah.
So we get these like 15 to 20 pound fluke that are bled on the boat. And I'll show you a picture of them. I've never seen fluke this big in my life. Like it's crazy. It's insane.
Wow.
And so, like all our fish is bled. Like we don't use almost anything that's not bled. And so the quality per price is like really good. But yeah, it's just, I mean, we try to work outwardly, right? We source close first and then work outward.
Yeah. Where do you buy camel?
North American Meats, I believe, is the company that we use for our camel.
So what other meats can you buy?
I mean, elk we have on the menu on and off right now, kangaroo, camel, turtle. I just had
Remember the little baby turtles, I believe?
Bro, I was just talking about that the other day, the massacre in the fucking basement.
Just killing baby
It was
turtles
literally a fucking massacre. Like the room was just filled with blood. Like it was filled with blood and like 4 tiny Japanese dudes.
Yeah.
I was like, what is happening here?
Context here. The Suji team came over from Japan and we had tons of baby turtles in soft shell turtles in the basement of Bouley that we were making chawanmushi out of. And these poor turtles were just getting massacred.
It was a fucking bloodbath.
So you got turtles.
Turtles.
Moment of silence for the turtles, camel, kangaroo. I remember this is overseas, having donkey in Italy.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's if that's something you can get here.
So there's it's not illegal to serve like horse or donkey here in the United States. It's just extremely frowned upon.
Yeah.
So
what's the there's gotta be other
sensitive.
But but are there other animals that that you're gonna put on the menu? I mean, like where does the line get crossed here?
I don't know.
Camel is basically a horse with.
Yeah, but it's not a pet, right? It's not a.
Well, I mean,
I think that's what
Berbers riding around on their camels.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a pet to us.
I mean, a hippo is not a pet. You gonna serve hippo?
I would personally.
I've had whale before, by the way, and it was not good.
Yeah, I've heard. Bouley was telling me about.
When I was in Norway, we ate whale. It tasted like the bloodline of tuna. Maybe there's good whale somewhere, by the way.
Yeah, totally.
I had zebra once, by the way.
Oh, really?
Kurt Decker, if you're listening, brought back zebra and these tinned zebra.
Oh, really? Interesting.
From somewhere in Africa. Disgusting.
Really?
Absolutely disgusting. I mean, it was tinned. It was probably just poor
quality.
Yeah,
it might have been.
But maybe zebra will be on your menu.
Zebra? I've had lion.
Oh, what?
I've had lion.
Yeah, see, now I feel like we're just getting... You got Foxface, but maybe we could just wind back a little bit because you had this incredibly successful supper club, is what I would call it, called Um Segredo, prior to Foxface. I'd love to just understand How did you make that work? 'Cause I think you were doing it out of your apartment in Roosevelt Island.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people do pop-ups now, but this was more than a pop-up. It was like I wouldn't call it underground because people knew about it, but it was almost just like a restaurant in your home. Like, how did you make that work? Were there like regulatory issues? And
so I have to give credit to Evan and Sarah Rich for being the inspiration behind the idea for Um Segredo. And they were in between restaurants. They had a space and it fell through. And I was kind of in the same situation where I just worked at 2 places that were a total disaster for me that just didn't work out. And I didn't want to take another job. I wanted to do something that was important to me or felt good. And since they were in between restaurants, and this was in San Francisco, they started a pop-up once a month at, I think it was at Quince? I can't remember where they were at the time.
I mean, that's how Cezanne started as well, right?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, exactly. I believe so. I don't want to misspeak, but so I was like, man, I said, that's a really good idea. I said, they're in between places right now and they're doing this thing. And even it's just to keep you sort of relevant and on your toes. I said, that's a great idea. And so I started doing it. I said, I'm going to do that. And I asked my roommates, I was living on Roosevelt Island at the time, and I had a huge apartment on Roosevelt Island that had a backyard and everything, separate entrance. Like, it was kind of the ideal place to do something like this. Had a huge kitchen, huge living room that I could fit 16 people down on one table, like one long table. And I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. He said, even if I do it a couple times just for my own mental health, I'm going to do this. And so I started it and I named it Um Segredo, which means a secret in Portuguese. It was very Portuguese based at first because that's who I am. And it just grew from there. And it ended up happening 3 days a week, every weekend at the apartment. And I would do, 45 to 60 people sometimes over the course of the weekend in my apartment. And, it was all word of mouth. It was a, cash business, if you will. And
that'd be so much fun too.
It was awesome. It was a great time.
Why'd you stop?
Because I'm an idiot. That's why.
I mean, did any sort of municipal or regulatory things pop up where, because it definitely sounds illegal.
It was not street legal. It was not street legal. I definitely could have gotten into a lot of trouble for doing it at the time. Listen, I take the same regulations as, I would in a restaurant. So I never really had any fear of,
I'm sure it was
someone sick.
You would have gotten
like
an A if you had gotten.
But, it is in your apartment, so it's very different. And I think one of the reasons why that place was so successful is, one, obviously the food, was delicious and all that, and it was fun and creative. But getting there was also part of the lore, if you will. So like people would like make a trip of it and like take the tram for the first time and, really.
Was the party experience like helping them get there?
Yeah. So I used to post like signs like from the tram, like Um Segredo this way, and like take them through like the sidewalks of Roosevelt Island and like through into my backyard.
That's awesome.
So it was I think that was part of the success of it. I had a lot of people ask me how to do it and, I want to start this. And I was like, especially people who weren't chefs that just like to cook. And
I think that's look, it's not only, professional chefs that make tasty food, but you started seeing supper clubs pop up a lot with like, someone who should maybe just be having their friends over.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's what I would say to them. And not in a rude way, because listen, man, I appreciate anybody who takes the time to cook a meal, right? It's awesome. But I remember saying to one gentleman who asked me, he's like, I want to do this. I make this really well, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, listen, man, like with respect, you can't do what I do, right? Like cooking one good dish or 2 or 3 good dishes is not the same as creating a menu, right? It's not the same. And it's okay that it's not the same. I wouldn't expect you to do that, like this is what I do. That's what I used to say to them. Like, this is what I do. My life is about this. Have your friends over, don't try charging people money for,
It's so interesting because it starts to touch on like what it means to be, a chef.
Yeah.
Because you can be a really good cook or you can cook good things, but that doesn't necessarily, it depends on how you define the word chef. Like I remember Marcus Glocker talking about, creating a tasting menu, and he's a musician.
Right.
And there's a progression to this thing, and there's a story behind it, and there's a crescendo. And yeah, first of all, like the ability to create a menu that has meaning. And if you are making Thanksgiving dinner, we're recording this before Thanksgiving, but it's maybe come out after. And there's a stress behind like when you're going to do X, Y, and Z and how you're going to get it all out, and you're pulling your hair out. It's because that's a skill.
Yeah.
Like making food
Without a
for
doubt.
16 people with 13 dishes and all these sides and getting it all out at the same time. That's a skill. And that's part of what it takes. And it's a responsibility you have. If you're going to feed that many people, that's just something you know how to do.
And that's why I used to try to tell people, like, creating this thing is not just about cooking. Like there's so much thought and research, especially like all those supper clubs that I was doing were all themed for the most part. It wasn't just like come to my house and eat, right? It was themed around whatever. A writer, I did a whole writer series. I did all these weird, fun, interesting series. Then I would create.
Did you do a Lebowski one?
I didn't do a Lebowski one.
I didn't.
I didn't do I did a Breaking Bad one.
Oh, that's what it was.
I did a Breaking Bad one. And I did the cookbook launch for The Walking Dead too, which was a lot of fun. But like all these things had themes, and that's what inspired the food. Like you can't just put something together. Like it just, again, and charging people money. I think that's the big thing. If you're expecting people to come to you to pay for food, you can't just throw it together. Like there's a responsibility there, I think.
I'm curious actually, because I think about this a lot with like, as we run our own businesses or thinking back to when you worked, for Craig or for Bouley, like, are there lessons that you learned, not cooking, that still stick with you today? Or things that like, principles or things that stick with you that you still use today? This podcast is brought to you by meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, meez is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmeez.com.
Yeah, I mean, I think who you end up working for in your life and in our, I guess in any business, but in our business, I think you take hopefully good away from the people you're learning from. There's plenty of bad out there, that you can also take, and that happens too. But I think someone like Bouley, right, who I love that man to death, but he was crazy, when it came to how that business was run, right? Like it's fucking insane. Like that didn't make any sense, didn't work, So you could have taken the intensity, insane side of it, or you could have taken his insane passion for ingredients. Like that man loves food, and he tried to source things as best as he could. And remember, he used to like all of a sudden we would get like just all this fish from Cape Cod because he like drove up there, and
or he would show up right before service with a whole pig and
with a whole pig.
change the
like,
menu.
hey, break this down and let's do a whole roasted pig. You're like, what? It was 5 minutes before service. What's going on? But his passion for ingredients was amazing. I think from him, I definitely took that on.
Yeah.
Whereas like, and obviously that's why Foxface is so successful, because our passion for ingredients. So I definitely think I took that from him. From someone like Thomas,
Keller.
Yeah, Thomas Keller. He has this dedication to like consistency that's unrivaled.
Yeah, it's almost like, I always think of precision when I think of TK.
It's
that's
wild.
He's just, precision is everything for him.
Yeah, there's this monotony of doing it right, you know? And I think I took that definitely away from him, where it was like, you have to do it right. You have to take the time. You have to take that extra step to make this thing great.
It's so interesting because, you know, you have these lessons, but they're out of context. They can, like, precision is so important, but without soul, it becomes very static.
Totally.
You know, and I think there's so many lessons we learn in, to your point, in any job.
Yeah.
But as a cook, as a chef, you know, these lessons that like transcend cooking, right? Like I remember, at Bouley, first of all, I remember a talk he gave after we lost a fourth star.
The fourth star.
And it sticks me to this day of just like thinking about your team. And he said, you know, he brought everybody together and he said, some of you are dancers, some of you are musicians, some of you want to be actors, some of you are doing this while you're in school, and that's okay. He said, this might not be the thing that you want to do for the rest of your life. And this is a really hard job. If you can do this really well, if you can give 100% here and you can do well here, think about how well you're going to do at the thing that you're really good at.
I gave that same speech at Louro to my staff. Literally, I gave that same speech.
I can never forget that. It's one of the things that, I mean, the other thing I think that I try to tell young folks that are just starting to cook is like, you're going to get upset with things that happen in a job you're working at. And it's very easy to say, to complain and say this sucks and this job sucks. And I remember Cesar always saying the job is what you make of it. But it's more than that, really. Actually, there's so much to learn from. I wouldn't have meez today if it wasn't for how terribly unorganized Bouley was. The fact that we didn't have a recipe for the pomme puree, that's one of the most famous things that he makes. And Evan Rich had to write down on a piece of parchment the ratio just so someone would know it. Yeah. And that the ocean herbal broth, that's another famous dish, there's no real recipe for.
No real recipe.
The idea of understanding how to set expectations, the idea of like the importance of consistency and having, you know, a tool. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that. And that might be a shortcoming of Bouley, but these are all things that like, you know, any job you have, you're going to have a good and a bad, but like, you got to learn just as much from them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Bad shit.
Yeah, you can't let a bad opportunity not be a learning experience, because that's actually, I think, a failure on you.
Yeah.
Like if you don't take as much from a bad experience as you do a good experience, then I think you're missing out. Like you said it best. I mean, Bouley in particular, that place puts you to the test. 100%. Like I remember, you remember, I mean, we were always short-staffed, never had enough people. And then we would do events, right? All over the world, country, not world.
Unpaid.
But, unpaid. And I remember vividly, Evan had to do the Cartier events. And one was in California, I think one was in Texas or whatever. And so I ended up having to work basically 10 doubles back to back, you know, 2 weeks worth of doubles. And I remember on my last double on Sunday, and the standard schedule, if you remember, was 6 days with a double. You had to work a double. You had to work one double so that your partner could have a day off. So that was the standard schedule. So on the 14th day,
and the single, by the way, the single was still like a 12-hour.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if we worked in the morning.
Yeah.
And so on the 14th day, I'm working 100+ hour weeks, sleeping at the Danube, on the couches at the Danube.
Rest in peace.
Yeah. I stood in the bathroom downstairs and I grasped, you know, the sink and I just stared at myself, just bloodshot eyes, pale as a ghost. And I said out loud, I said, Dave, this is now your choice. If you want to do this for a living, you're going to go upstairs, you're going to finish service, or you're going to get the fuck out of here and you're never going to look back again. And I sat there and I thought about it. And I washed my face. I went back upstairs and I finished service and I never looked back. I've always been a part of this business. That was a huge learning moment for me. Like to push that threshold. Obviously, you know, I would never want to do that to someone personally, but to go through that and to feel that brink of decision where it could have gone either way at that point. That experience alone was so valuable to me. And I got that through a place that was very difficult. Yeah. You know? And so I think you have to take as much from those bad situations as you do good situations. Because anybody can survive in good.
I feel like this is a continuing theme that we talk about. I always want to be careful not to say, oh, in the old days. But what do you lose when you don't have that experience? Like if you're a chef and you never have the experience of 6 days in a double, of just the grind of, what would seem probably today just completely unacceptable, but totally. To us was,
normal.
For me, and I was talking to Mark Fortune about this early on in the podcast. Like, I wonder if camaraderie is lost a bit, because the one thing we have is like, we're kind of like at war together.
100%.
And I don't know if you lose that. I hope that you don't, but I'm curious what you think.
So the thing that gets lost, right? I mean, there's that whole Japanese idea of it takes X amount of hours to be good at something, right? Boulet's reasoning behind working us that way was that. Like that.
Sure.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I actually talked about it with him.
Okay.
And he firmly believes in that mentality of, the longer you do this thing, your station in this case, the better you will be at it, right? So hours put in, I think, make for, I won't say success, but make you a consistent, better cook. I believe that there's something lost in the generation of today who don't spend all those hours. Not that it's better or worse. I'm not saying that. But I do believe that there's something lost there in people's abilities. I think that the consistency, isn't always there on younger generation. I think some of what you're saying is also true as far as the camaraderie and, going to, I don't like using the word battle, but going to, through these tough services. I mean, doing 250 covers with, the people next to you every day. There's something to that, while having to survive, like prepping and so and so forth. There's definitely something that's lost in all those hours. Like I always say, I wouldn't trade my experience at Boulet or Per Se at all. Like it was super hard and difficult, and I hated it, a lot of it, but I wouldn't trade it because it made me who I am today. But I don't necessarily wish it upon others.
Yeah, it's almost like, as a parent, you don't want your children to go through the same hardship as, but you also want to make sure that they're resilient.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's things gained from this as much as there's things that are lost. And we won't really know yet, but we're starting to see.
I think that what you just said, the resiliency, I think is probably what I was looking for, and I couldn't come up with a word. I think that's a big thing of it.
I struggle with, I have 2 kids. I'm sure everyone struggles with this. My wife is the best mom ever. She's incredible. Oftentimes I have to step back because my immediate, response when my kid is doing something or having a hard time is I want to embrace that struggle.
Right.
And I think, part of parenting 2.0 has been, hey, wait a second, no, we need to be in tune with their emotions, and we have to listen to them and understand and let them experience these things. And it's tough. It's a tough bridge. Sure. And it's the same thing I'm seeing, I see sort of a parallel with, with this, of that, yes, we went through all of these, things that are actually legal, shift pay, things that are just frowned upon.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't have that. Right. And not to mention screaming and throwing plates and things like that. That should not happen.
Right.
But how do you continue to build resilience and calluses without that? And I know you can. I just think that it's a new challenge.
It's definitely a new challenge. Not everybody's good at it either, like creating those environments. I think there's a way, and I think I do a decent job of it because I did come from, so like Boulet was the environment we're talking about. Per Se was a very tough environment, but it wasn't the same as, like, the tools were given to you at Per Se, right? To succeed. Yeah. Boulet was different, right? You were just expected to succeed somehow. And somehow. So I think those two experiences in my life, working at those two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum and still finding success, I think has benefited me in a way where I try to provide as much tools as I can for the people who work for me. More importantly, I try to provide education, which I think is super important for people to expect from their chef.
Yeah.
But I don't always make it easier on you. Like, I don't want it to be easy. I want it to be like good and learning and tough to, to form that resiliency, those calluses within reason. Like, I'm still always going to be there to support you. And if you are failing, I'm never going to let you fall.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to, let you sit on that line sometimes for a little bit so that you feel what it is like to like, man, I got to push, I got to move, And I was saying this last night even to one of my cooks who I love to death, but sometimes he just doesn't get that drive, doesn't get that move.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to him last night about it. I said, listen, man, like, I need to see you pushing so that I know like you're really, know. And so I try to create that balance as best I can. But it's difficult. It's super hard. Like, you don't know. And everybody's different, right? Like,
Well, I think we just have to be better leaders today than before. It's interesting. You have to instill some friction. There's a really interesting book by this guy, Robert Cialdini, and it's about persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
There's these 4 principles of persuasion. One of them revolves around effort.
Right.
And, they've done these studies. And, for example, the idea of the hazing, the initiation into a fraternity, right? These fraternities are like adamant about keeping these initiation processes, even though they can very often be dangerous. And they started doing these studies around, a control group, an A and a B, and one group has a very difficult, process to get through in order to become part of a group.
Right.
And then another group just gets into the group right away.
Right.
Right. And then they follow that each group over time. And it's very clear that the ones that have to struggle appreciate that group much more, stick with it much longer, have a far deeper, not just appreciation, but like are grateful and have much more of a connection to that group than the ones that just got in right away. Yeah. And so we do have to find ways to create friction, and we just have to do it in a way that is still mindful of, the human being that are part of this. And that's, it's not easy. And I think what's interesting is I think that we just, in the food world, we just didn't really have leadership and management skills taught to us.
Right.
And so it was kind of a Wild West because we didn't know any other. And no one ever told us like, hey, that like anger you're showing right now, that's you, not them.
Yeah, 100%.
Eric Bromberg said something to me one time years ago. So Eric Bromberg is the founder of Blue Ribbon Restaurants. We were talking about like what makes Blue Ribbon successful. And he didn't even like hesitate. Yeah. He's like, create an environment where people can be successful.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
100%.
And, when you think about like Bouley or many restaurants, where you don't give them the tools, you don't set the right expectations, or you set like expectations without telling them how to get there.
Right.
And, that's an easy way to fail, right? It's like, I don't know. I don't even know if I'm making this right.
Yeah,
but you're going to yell
guaranteed.
At me,
yeah, exactly.
So I think it's good. I think overall it's great that the industry is actually getting better, and that you're becoming a better leader, and that you're thinking about your team that way. So
I mean, it's different. Like you said, I think to your point, I think it's a matter of like, I don't think our generation and generations before us had people that were mindful of these things, where you were just expected to do, whether that be right or wrong. And if you fucked it up, you got yelled at.
Yeah.
And so many, I think, of us carry that same forward because it's a cycle, right? Like it just keeps getting fed and fed, So it's definitely up to us, I think, to break that cycle and to be mindful of that cycle, but also to find balance with it. Like you said, by just letting that group of people into that's not the answer either, right? Yeah. That's not the answer either. But so I think being mindful of finding a balance between the two. I mean, if you I look at myself and my career and, at Bouley or wherever it was, like at the Ryland Inn, like I said earlier, like I was a young cook full of anger, aggression. I got into a fight, almost literally killed someone. And that's who I was then. And I think my experiences through the people that have inspired me over my life in and outside of cooking, that's not who I am today. You know, like I'm actively working on myself as a leader as much as I am trying to inspire the people who are working for me. And I think people forget that. Like, it's not only about you and them, like you have to have both, right? You have to work on yourself as much as you are
more so
on other people.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's awesome to hear, man. I'm going to pivot a bit and we're close to the end, I promise. I'm sure you got shit to do.
I talk all day, so.
So another topic I'd love to get your opinion on, because I saw something recently from a food critic. I mean, Robert Shutsema. So I'll just say his name. You got 3 stars recently.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk a little about like your thoughts on the value of food critics and then where it goes right, where it goes wrong. And and specifically also, we're in an industry where we can't actually charge what we need to charge. Like we're one of the only industries 100%. Where we can't charge the margins that we need to, because there's a ceiling to how much people will pay for X, Y, and Z.
Correct.
Now that can change over time, but right now there's a perception of value of a burger and of a steak and everything, and you can't charge more than that. And I'm curious what you think the role of food critics and food journalists are in helping to promulgate a new way to think about this, because I don't see a way for us to grow without the consumers being able to see a world where things might cost more. Because, look, I think, and this will be a bit of a rant, but like, we don't sell food at a restaurant.
Right.
And if you think about the price that you're paying based on calculating the cost of you going and buying those ingredients and making them, that's just a flawed perception. Because
for sure,
one, first of all, you'd have to buy all those things in bulk. So unless you're making for 10 people, you're gonna.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they're asking you what you want.
Yep.
You're sitting down and getting things handed to you and poured to you. Think about what it would cost if you had a butler and someone else serving you at your house, and someone else cleaning up after you. What do you pay for that? Yeah. And I think that's the perception that people don't think about, is I get to have a night where all of those things are part of my experience. Right. On top of, by the way, we create thoughtful food and thoughtful experiences and thoughtful ambiance, right? The right lighting and that is a story that I feel like is not told enough.
Correct. By
writers and journalists. I don't know if it's their job to, but I'm curious what you think, because I think you've had some scuffles in the past.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I've definitely gotten into it with critics, and news media, I think, oftentimes covers the wrong things, talks about the wrong things. You well documented in having my arguments with media critics. Critics are like, for me anyway, they're just, I would love, and I don't want to judge critics for their work, right? It is what it is. I think it's a part of our industry, right? I think it's sad that one person's opinion can literally close a restaurant. I think that's ridiculous to me. I think I would love to see reviews go into more of an educational side, as far as like, this is what this is like, and this is why they're doing this, or whatever. That I'm not a writer, so I don't know how to go about that, but I would love to see that be more of a critic's job instead of just judging. I mean, I'm thankful for our 3-star review, obviously, but I would love for the stars to die. I just think it's silly.
There aren't many worlds where a product has an arbiter like a food critic. So, and I heard Ruth Reichel talk about the difference between food media and food journalism, which I appreciate, right? So food media being, eater, maybe, versus journalism where you're writing.
Yeah.
And I think that I understand that premise and that makes sense. But to your point of a food journalist, a Pete Wells, can make or break your restaurant.
Yeah.
Think about, another business that you would go to.
Yeah.
A salon, buying a product like a phone or something like that, where there's, in your geographical area, there's an arbiter of quality, of taste, that just says that's not good.
Yeah.
Which is, no matter what, subjective. And then that's it.
It's an opinion.
It impacts a lot of things.
Yeah.
And it's a tough thing because I understand their purpose, right? Is they want to anonymously let consumers, diners know that like, hey, in an anonymous experience, this is what you should expect from this restaurant.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. I think that makes sense and that's nice. But they have a lot of eyeballs and they have a lot of influence and they have a lot of attention. And it's not like going to Wirecutter or going to Product Hunt or going to Yelp even and seeing reviews, because there's a discount to all those things in that, like, it's a person that is it's their opinion. And it's also the food writer's opinion.
Yes.
It's one person's opinion
exactly
who tends to override, thousands of others.
Right.
When it's a star review.
Right.
And I don't know if it's necessarily, wrong or that shouldn't happen, but it's interesting that in the food world that there is this arbiter where you don't see that in other.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think I can't come up with one off the top of my head.
Even in movies, there are critics, but it doesn't have the same influence.
No, I mean, not even a little bit. I mean, you think about whatever Siskel and Ebert or whoever, like they didn't like a movie. So a lot of those movies went on to extreme success. Where if a critic, as like the Times critic, whoever that may be, if they, write something scathing about you, fucking back it up. Like, there's no point, especially in New York City. I mean, obviously other cities are the same, but there's no point in continuing. You are just going to dig yourself a money pit, and you should literally just close your restaurant.
I think some pushback could be, look, Danielle has lost a star. If you're just starting out in New York, for example, and not many people know about you, and then, you get a scathing, Times review, that you're going to have a very hard time, getting enough business to continue.
Exactly. Because, the New Yorker, the dining New Yorker, a lot of times they're have short memories and they see this thing, they want to go to this thing, but then all of a sudden, if the thing gets a bad review, then they don't want to go to this thing anymore either,
We service communities no matter what. So even in New York, you might be a Greenwich Village restaurant, and the people in the village, will go there. If they have a good experience, they'll come back.
Yeah, totally.
That said, it's very expensive to operate in New York, and you need more than the people in that because there's too much optionality. So you need to have people coming from, even if it's not out of town, from uptown, from downtown, from Jersey, and those reviews are what
that's what. It's very difficult in today to survive on your neighborhood, if you will. I think Louro was the perfect example of what we're talking about right now. Talking about a restaurant that a lot of people loved, and we were very busy in the beginning. And then, even because we were new, we were very busy, but we got, we were trying to be a 2-star restaurant. We weren't trying to be a 4-star restaurant. We were trying to be a great 2-star restaurant. That was my goal for Louro, right? Wells came in the 4th week that we were open, which is fucking retarded. Plain and simple. Like, what restaurant is on all cylinders in their 4th week, right? I don't think it used to be the Times used to wait 3 months. Mm-hmm. That was the kind of the unsaid standard, I know why it's changed with media and, everybody writing reviews, but we weren't ready. We had, as a team, the first time we cooked together was the day we opened. Yeah. We turned that restaurant over in 2 weeks,
And by the way, it's very expensive to do that. We at Cafe Great was the same thing. We were reviewed a few weeks in.
Yeah.
And even though we had spent months, it's a few weeks in. So restaurants have become the bystander of the immediacy of media. And that's, that's a bummer,
And so, we ended up getting a very positive, a good 1-star review. If you were to ask Pete, I think if he liked Louro, I think he would say yes, but it was a 1-star review, and a 1-star review, for a restaurant that's spending $19,000 a month in rent, X amount of employees and stuff, it's not going to survive. And we ended up slowly but surely getting less busy. And that restaurant ended up closing because the lease was up. But I don't know how much longer we could have survived without digging a huge pit, you know? And that was a restaurant that was very, I mean, if you look at whether it be Yelp or whatever, it's a popular restaurant. Like people loved Louro. People 8 years later, it's been 8 years since Louro closed, or 9 almost now. It's still talked about. Like people still ask me about and talk about dinners they had at that restaurant. But yet this critic gave it a 1 star because you have to remember after the first week or two, whatever, no one's reading the review anymore. They're just looking at the star. And so I think that greatly affects things. And it's, like I said, I think it's sad. I would love for it to be a more educational thing from a critic than just I liked it or not, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I think, you know, there's the argument of like, oh, critics don't know, you know, Pete Wells isn't a chef, but I think that's okay. You don't.
Neither
you
are half the people coming in.
That's what I mean. It's like they don't need to be that. Like you're actually better off not being a chef. You should be a diner, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Well, I want to end on a positive note. So
before you go there, hold on. Term limits is my idea for critics.
Tell me about this.
I think a critic should have a term limit. I think that.
But wait, hold on. What if it turns out that this critic is incredibly educational and unbiased and thoughtful? Like,
they aren't the only one, right? I think it's up to the source or Times or whatever to find good people.
I think you're talking about then democratizing this and voting in a critic.
Why not? I just think that after a certain point, you get either jaded or you're just going through the motions, you're getting things. And it's hard to find inspiration. I think we find that in all of our work, not just, you know.
It's also hard to stay anonymous.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, dude, everybody knows who Pete Wells is at this point, right? Everybody knows.
And again, it's really hard to do that job if you're not anonymous, because the minute that they know who you are,
everything changes.
And your experience is completely different.
Yeah.
And if your job is to tell what the everyday experience is, then that becomes incredibly hard.
Exactly.
If you're not anonymous.
It's interesting. I mean, the whole thing I think is interesting. It's obviously, you know, it's a loaded kind of for, you know, I think chefs to talk about. I mean, we obviously talk about it amongst ourselves all the time, but those would be the two things for me. Like, I think that having some sort of term limit, like you can be the Times critic for, and it's not 2 years. I'm saying you can 8 years, whatever it is, you know, like I think at that point, it's just time for a new perspective to come in. Not that you're doing a bad job. It has nothing to do with you. I think perspectives change over time. And I think when you're immersed in something, it's hard to change your perspective. You know what I'm saying?
That's a great
point.
And
then obviously, I think I would love to see it be a little bit more educational than otherwise. But that's the last point I wanted to say.
No, it's all good. All good. All right. We're going to wrap this up, man. What's in the pipeline for you? What should we look forward to with Mr. Dave Santos?
I mean, besides working, I mean, Foxface, we're going to continue to grow there and do our, you know, our best to keep everything interesting, awesome. And, you know, our goal for next year is hopefully to get a Michelin star. I mean, that's our goal was always 3 times
I'm
in
sure
one Michelin. Yeah, we'll see. You know, I mean, it can be fit. Again, that's the goal. It's not.
Yeah.
If it happens, we're still going to do what we do, you know, but I think it's important to have kind of expectations of yourself, you know, and if these are the things that measure you, then that's what you have to use. That's the biggest thing right now. I know there's some talk of expansion on some things. We might go into the next building because we are so small. We're only 27 or 30 seats, whatever. Mm-hmm. So we might expand into the building next door. We'll see. I don't know if that's going to go down.
Any Portuguese seafood stew
maybe
popping up?
I would love to do. So right now we're closed on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Actually, we're only open 4 days a week now. Okay. We are expanding on that. But I would also like to do some guest chef dinners and, you know, some fun Portuguese dinners and things like that on these days that we have off right now. So we have some work, you know, some plans for that sort of thing to start probably in the new year. And then for me personally, just been working on that YouTube channel. You know?
Yeah, it's awesome, man. I love seeing you cooking on that thing, man.
It's fun, man. I think if you have a voice, I think it's fun to do that sort of thing.
Yeah,
and so I do try to keep
the monkey bread pizza thing.
Yeah, like that.
That was awesome.
That
I was like,
so
oh,
good.
what a good idea.
I ate the hell out of the thing, man. It was so
Everybody should go check out Monkey Bread. Was it Monkey Bread Pizza?
I can't remember what I called
Well,
it.
it was
Something
real
like
good.
that. It's just Dave. If you look up Dave, Chef David Santos.
Well, this was awesome, man. Good seeing you, man.
You too, brother.
It's been too long.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for tuning into the Meez podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmeez.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.